You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam. Streaming on iTunes and at facebook.com/DCAU Review. Now, here's today's episode.
Welcome everybody to the DCAU Review. We are in episode 10 of the DCAU Review. Congratulations. Yes, we've made it all the way to number 10. Thank you for joining us today. With me, as always, my co-host, brother, and good friend, Liam. Liam, welcome to the DCAU Review. We've made it to 10 episodes.
We've done 10 of these things.
It's crazy.
And people actually listen, which is the coolest part to me.
If you say so, that's great. Hello, listeners. We appreciate, of course, those that love and support us and that have been listening to us, sticking with us all the way through 10 episodes. Hard to imagine we just started this a few months ago, Liam, and that we've already made it through 10.
I mean, that's the fun part, and we talk about one of the nicest parts, especially, this is a little different, we're doing a two-parter here today, but for the most part, these episodes are 22 minutes, so it's once you get rolling and once we've sort of gotten our sea legs, so to speak, and figuring out how this show goes exactly, it's really easy to start getting through them, and especially when it's fun stuff like this to talk about, it becomes really easy to watch and review them.
I don't believe I introduced myself. I'm Cal, the host of the DCAU Review. So it is good to be here with you guys. Yeah, man, it's nostalgia is at an all-time high in popularity. So it's fun to look back at something that was such a big part of our childhood and made such an impact on our lives, even through today, which is a little goofy to say about a children's cartoon, but it does. It's impacted a lot of the things that we do, our interests, things that we collect and spend our time doing, all influenced by this cartoon that's now 25 years old, so almost 26 years old. With that said, thank you again for joining us here on the DCAU Review. We're going to jump right into this week's episode, which is going to be actually a two-parter that we're talking about, and it's the first two-part episode thus far of the Batman animated series, and that is, of course, Two-Face Parts 1 and 2. And Liam, this is an interesting one. We talked a few episodes ago with Pretty Poison about the character development they were doing with Harvey Dent. He was featured in the very first episode, just very briefly, in On Leather Wings. But we saw the character really start getting fleshed out in Pretty Poison, and his relationship, along with his relationship with Bruce, just who he is as a character, what he means to the city of Gotham. And in this episode, really the first part is spent really just fleshing out that character even more, touching a little bit on his relationship with Bruce, his relationship to the city of Gotham as its district attorney, and it really does a good job. I really enjoyed this episode. Overall, I think it's one of the most. It's definitely it falls under the serious category. It's not a goofy one like last week's Be a Clown was, or some of the other Joker ones we've had. Much more on the serious side. Covers a lot of deep stuff in it. But what were your general thoughts on this?
Yeah, it delved into the tragedy. As you mentioned, it's really, there's not a lot of laughs.
Yeah.
Some of the background thugs have a funny line or two, but no, for the most part, this is a character study of a man who has a lot to lose, and through his fear of his issues being discovered, he does in fact lose everything. And sort of there's a parallel between sort of the origins of Batman, where he, his entire world is shaken, and it affects every decision Batman makes for the rest of his life will be affected by his parents being killed. And in the same way, this personality disorder that Harvey Dent has, that sort of slowly manifested itself over time and was this big issue sort of underneath the surface, and this, being caught in a chemical explosion to literally make him Two-Face is that will forever change him. There's no going back to an extent, or so it appears when he becomes Two-Face. But real quick, just mention if this is the first time listening, we have our four main categories is how we break down every episode.
Absolutely.
So we have plot, animation, voice acting, and music. They're all scored, each category is scored from 0 to 10. So total score 40. There's also a bonus category where you can throw out an extra point or two if something's not covered under those main categories. But just a quick mention, we can start out with plot here.
Absolutely.
as we're sort of talking in broad strokes here, I went ahead and gave plot a 8 out of 10 here.
Yeah.
It's a really strong story through the 2 parts. Not a lot of Batman.
Yeah, it's another episode. We talked about that a little bit before we went on the air. Just that this is an episode where Batman is another supporting character. We've had a couple of those episodes thus far, and it's weird that some of those, it's okay. And this is an episode where it's pretty universally loved from what I can tell, and seeing the rankings that other people did in 2017 for the 25th anniversary. This ranks up there pretty high. It's a really good, really well written episode. But you're right. There's not a lot of Batman in it. There's some Bruce Wayne, Harvey Dent dichotomy that they work on in that first episode. But the first part, Batman's not really in it until the very end of it, when Harvey has this encounter with Rupert Thorne that eventually leads to his transformation into Two-Face.
Yeah, there's a brief scene at the beginning of part 1 where Batman sort of helps with a drug bust, but yeah, you're absolutely right. He is a background character to this story, which is very focused on Harvey Dent, his relationship with his second fiance in 9 episodes here, 10 episodes here.
Harvey Dent, not a man afraid to get engaged.
No, he will put a ring on it.
He is busting the stereotype of the non-committal man right and left.
Absolutely.
If you are a female and you are in a willing relationship with Harvey Dent, he will ask you to marry him.
Oh, absolutely. That's a pattern 100% of the time. 100% of the time that we have seen Harvey Dent in a romantic relationship, he has put a ring on it.
That's right.
So, sort of the plot, basically, at the start of it, that, Harvey Dent has this drug bust that goes super well that he planned, and he's getting married, and he's about to be reelected, and in fact is reelected to the district attorney's office. They make sure to mention, in a landslide. He's a very popular guy. He's, maybe one of the only clean politicians. We talked about that with Jim Gordon, maybe one, and maybe Bullock, sort of the only clean cops in the city. Whereas, here you have sort of maybe one of the only clean politicians in the city.
Right.
A guy who is, we talked on the Be a Clown episode about kind of what an oaf and sort of a silly character Mayor Hill can be.
Yeah.
And that's not who Harvey is. He's very capable. He's planning drug busts. He's trying to, really attack crime in a way that Batman can't.
Yep.
And that's been delved into, especially like in the Dark Knight movies, of who Harvey Dent is. The Long Halloween comic that Jeff Loeb wrote was another great example of the idea of sort of attacking crime in a way. Batman can beat up all the bad guys, but the idea of prosecuting a case against this incredibly powerful and rich mob boss in Rupert Thorne. But Batman's not a lawyer. Batman's...
Batman puts them away, but to keep them away, that's Harvey Dent's job. And you're right. I think this episode, especially part 1 specifically, because that's what's focused on Harvey, it does a great job of showing his value that he adds to the city. His teamwork with Gordon, he has a great relationship with Jim Gordon that you can tell, especially after the opening scene where he kind of loses his temper and we get our first glimpse of Big Bad Harv. Gordon takes him aside, puts his arm around him, and reminds him that voters are watching and that he needs to conduct himself as a politician should, rather than physically attack someone that he just was able to get arrested. But yeah, and as we move into part 2, obviously the end of part 1 is sort of the reveal of Two-Face, and we immediately jump 6 months ahead of time, which we talked a little bit about that. It leaves a little bit to be desired, because you have this character that they built up in the first episode. It's a tragedy, like you said. It's a tragic story. This guy is a guy who's really a good person trying to make a difference in a terrible city, and he just happens to have a mental disorder. He has a split personality disorder, and there's something a little bit that's touched on here. I thought that it's interesting. Social issues today that are relevant were kind of touched on in that, and the bullying thing, which has been a huge thing over the last several years, which should have probably been a focus a long time ago. But this whole thing, his Big Bad Harv persona comes from this bullying that was done to him as a child, and then On top of it, then he gets bullied. He's basically being bullied again by Rupert Thorne at the end of this episode. But then he has this mental health disorder that's developed because of it, because he's held his feelings inside and feels that anger is something that he needs to hide from everybody. And he feels like there's sort of a stigma that he can't. He doesn't even want Bruce, his best friend, to know that he's going to see a psychiatrist to help him kind of deal with this. That it's something he needs to hide away and maybe it's a politician thing. He mentions he's worried about being elected, but I think even the stigma, there's a social issue in that, and we're neither of us are doctors or professionals, so we're not going to stand up here and pretend like we have all the answers. But the idea that this itself is an issue that hey, people go through this. People are sick. People have these issues, and the fact that it's such a stigma with mental health issues that people automatically would think there's something wrong with you, that you are somehow disqualified from serving the city in the capacity that he has is kind of tragic in itself.
Yeah, and I think from the idea, if it's again something that's insanely relatable. Yeah. For this children's cartoon to delve into, if you know somebody that's dealt with a serious mental issue, if you yourself have, and if you yourself are dealing with something, it can be very embarrassing to have to ask for help or to admit that, or especially, and as you mentioned, he's in this very public life, and the idea that Joe Sixpack on the street learns that D.A. Dent has to go see a shrink every week to control his anger problems, like that's the idea of that getting out to not just your friends and family. As you mentioned, he's terrified of Bruce finding out. The only person that appears to know is Grace, his fiance. Right. But that much less an entire city's worth of people kind of knowing your dirty laundry. Absolutely. And so the fear of that being discovered is what leads him to go to the meeting with Thorne, which in the end then causes the explosion happens and he is turned into Two-Face, and as we mentioned, it sort of jumps 6 months later to there where he's sort of terrorizing Thorne, and we're sort of off to the races from there, and we sort of see the doubts when Grace's name is mentioned. There's great sorrow in his eyes, and we'll get into that when we talk animation and voice acting, but and it all comes down to he is undone because he can't get this woman out of his head, despite the fact the idea is Harvey Dent is no more and only Two-Face, and he talks about the coin being the only law that matters is the law of averages. That nothing else matters. That this love for this woman that he had doesn't matter. His friendship with Bruce Wayne doesn't matter. The city that he was helping to clean up doesn't matter. It's all random. It's all chance. He talks about the idea of even being born, dying. Everything is all in his head now is all left up to chance, and so the only thing that makes sense to him is to put on, and that's when the comic book edge comes in, where it's the only way that it makes sense is to him to put on a two-toned suit and go shoot machine guns at people, like and flip a coin and live in abandoned nightclubs that are only half lit, and have twins as his henchmen. And I will say, like around the time this show was on, Batman Forever came out, and they went very over the top with the Tommy Lee Jones portrayal. Where he has like a half purple zebra striped suit.
He has a Zuba's suit. Yeah.
Yes, Zuba's suit. Excellent. Yeah. And this is sort of that same idea. Like you said, his hideout is sort of half of it is lit up and half is in the dark and half of it's well decorated and half it isn't. But it's not so garish or so over the top. It doesn't become
it's
comedy ever.
It's definitely not used as a spoof or as something to it teeters on that edge with him robbing, and that's, part of the plot in part 2 is he goes on and now he's determined, since Rupert Thorne ruined him, that he's going to return the favor, and he's robbing a bunch of Rupert Thorne's different fronts that he uses to launder money. Again, this is a children's cartoon, so amazing that laundering money is a thing that they're talking about here. But the fact that, first of all, why does Rupert Thorne have so many clubs that are based on the number 2? The Gemini Club and Second Cafe or whatever it was. And that's a little bit of a stretch there. But Yeah, the fact that the plot took that turn and it teeters on that edge there, but I don't think it fully goes over to that goofiness because it brings it back to, he loves, part of him still loves Grace, part of him still wants that normalcy of a relationship and things to go back to normal, but he's at war with himself.
Yeah, so they do a pretty darn near perfect job expressing that. Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, it's still got that comic book flavor too. You still have the crazy gimmicks, and you still have Batman swinging around and driving his motorcycle with his bat-shaped the helmet that protects his cowl.
So cool.
It looks awesome, and so you still have the comic book trappings that make the show Batman. But just delving in so deeply to mental health issues and a very basic thing of, he talks about good and evil is arbitrary.
Yeah.
The sort of, as a very, defeatist, the idea of everything being so binary and all left up to chance. That's, again, incredibly different and incredibly deep, but it really delves into who the character of when Two-Face is portrayed as his best, as you mentioned, it can get very gimmicky.
Right.
All the twos stuff. So the idea that they were able to portray that, give him a sympathetic edge, but still explain why he is so dangerous, because he's so, he's literally making every decision by the flip of a coin.
Yeah,
it's terrifying. So yeah, I went ahead and gave plot 8 out of 10 just to get started here.
Yeah.
What did you give it?
That's a good question. I ended up giving it 7 out of 10. There were a couple, like I said, I think that jump from, okay, he's been disfigured, and it was the night of an election that he went to meet Thorne and got disfigured. The fact that he made such a giant jump from, I guess the argument could be made that it was, the disfigurement caused him to completely lose it at that point.
We don't see that.
But we don't see it. Yeah, it's kind of an off-screen. Part 1 ends with the reveal of his face to his fiancée, and then we pick up in part 2 where it's 6 months later and he's, walking around in a split black and white suit shooting up all of Thorne's and robbing Thorne's assets and stuff like that. So we don't get to see what happened, what ultimately led to that, whether it was a immediate thing, what was the cause to then flip the switch all of a sudden.
Who's his tailor?
Right. And there were 1 or 2 minor plot holes. One was what's Thorne's lackey, the girl lackey's
Candace.
name? Candace, who later plays a huge role in the Bane episode. She somehow finds out that Harvey is at a psychiatrist's office. They don't really tell you how she discovers whether she was tailing them or, that's kind of resolved off screen. And that's a big plot point because then there's a break-in where they get his file and Thorne's going to release it, and that's what he blackmails him with.
Yeah.
So that was kind of, I wasn't sure about that. Also, suspend disbelief, sure, but Two-Face opens his wallet and has a credit card in his wallet made out to Two-Face. So that tells me that within the last 6 months, between the disfigurement to the time that we see him now, he went into a bank and applied for a credit card under the legal name Two-Face, because that's what you would have to do. He provided a social security name. He must have legally changed his name to Two-Face, because in order to get a credit card, maybe he went to the mob credit card store and you just put whatever
maybe it's
name.
like a black market gold card or something.
I guess that's possible, but I just appreciated that he opened his wallet and his credit card was listed Two-Face. Regardless, I gave it 7 out of 10. It's a good story. It's a little bit gimmicky in the second episode, but it's an overarching good, full 44 minutes of good storytelling that didn't need a whole lot of Batman to carry the load.
Agreed.
So from that, let's move on to music. Liam, I think this one will probably be our quickest that we cover. I ended up giving music a 6 out of 10. A 6 out of 10 for this week, just because it's another one of those episodes where music wasn't needed to advance the plot as much. The story was strong, like we said. There was a lot of the voice acting, to me, which we'll talk about in a second, is what carried this episode. It wasn't really needed. There's some background filler in certain places. There was a crescendo that built up to the part where he actually gets disfigured in the explosion. And then in the opening scene, they introduced the Two-Face theme, which is this kind of very somber sort of it's like a flute or something that comes in.
There's some strings. You hear a bell sound in it.
Yeah, it's very somber, kind of underlying creepy. Like it's clearly a villain theme, but there's a twinge of tragedy to it, which I think is the theme that we're going for in this episode. It's just it's great, and especially at the end, they use it, they kind of mix it in like they do with most episodes with the Batman theme. But overall, the episode didn't need the music in this, so it's not a score that reflects bad music or that it's bad that there's an absence of music. It just wasn't needed. So I gave it a 6 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I went 5 out of 10. Don't have a ton to add there. It's like I said, like when it comes in, there's a really nice spot at the end of part 2 where Batman sort of gives his final word and flips the coin into the pond, and the Two-Face theme sort of melds with the Batman theme, and it sort of ends up. There's like it's very somber and a little sad, but there's sort of a twinge of hope. Like it ends on a high note, literally.
They brought back that theme from the Nothing to Fear episode where he's standing at the grave at the end with the strings that come in and the crescendo at the end into the dun 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 dun. It's great.
Poor Harvey. So filled with anger. Do you think there's any hope?
Where there's love, there's hope, Commissioner. But a little luck wouldn't hurt. For you, Harvey.
It's goosebump inducing.
Absolutely.
Paired with the actual action of him flipping the coin is really good.
Yeah. Too. Yeah, so that's like you said, nothing particularly wrong, and in certain spots it really does enhance it, but music is definitely, I would say, on the list of importance of our regular 4 categories, it's definitely the least important as far as what makes this episode great.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to animation, shall we? I went ahead for animation. I gave it a 7 out of 10. I think I really had to break it down between the 2 episodes. It's tough because you look at this as one story, and we kind of went back and forth as to whether we should give 2 separate scores or 1 score. But because of it's one story, we went ahead and gave it an overall score. But I thought the animation in the first episode, which we saw in the credits, was actually storyboarded by at least one of the storyboard artists was Glenn Murakami, who went on and did Teen Titans later on, and has done other DC projects as well, and in Superman the Animated Series he worked on that. I don't know did he work on Justice League at all?
I think he was a producer on the first season of Justice League, and then left to do Teen Titans at that point. He was a producer on Batman Beyond as well, so he's one of the Mount Rushmore guys, probably for DCAU guys. So he did some of the storyboarding on the first episode, which I think lends to there's a lot of close-up shots of Harvey Dent's face. I think the way that they did the transition from him to Big Bad Harv, the background behind him turns red, and invokes that emotion of anger. His face gets kind of really starts to move his eyebrows down, and you get a lot of detail in his face. It lended to a little bit of Murakami's style, I think, which is more towards the anime style, as you can see in his character designs for Teen Titans later on. They called it his style when he did Teen Titans. They called it Murakanime.
Okay.
Because it's very much, obviously the anime is very much there, but it's still a more fluid American style, which I'm sure he got coming up working with Bruce Timm, and
absolutely
worked on Tiny Toons and a bunch of other traditional American animation. So
absolutely,
he is excellent at that sort of marriage of the Japanese and American style of animation.
Absolutely,
and I think that shines through here.
Yeah, definitely in that first episode. You get to the second episode, and I felt like the first half of the second episode was just not done very well. The scene where Bruce and Alfred are in the Batcave and they're having a serious conversation that Alfred is in one scene, I think, in this episode, maybe two scenes, but the episode, the conversation he has with Bruce is fantastic.
Yeah.
But I was taken out of that scene just because the character designs were, you mentioned, it wasn't completely off to the point like we talked about in Mask of the Phantasm, but it was just something about it was not right. You could tell it was like, I don't know.
It's kind of consistently inconsistent,
right,
where it looks pretty close,
right,
to the traditional, like what you think of when you think of the Batman animated series art.
Sure.
But like his chin, like the ears are maybe a little swept back a little more.
Yeah.
You see a lot of like under his chin.
A lot of Batman under chin
yes,
shots.
and which is just sort of a square.
Right.
Like, which is fine when you're shooting, his face straight ahead, but you sort of see Batman with his head tilted up a little bit more.
Yeah.
And it just looks a little odd, I guess. Trying to make obviously you're trying to make his face look three dimensional. I get why they did that, but it's just a little off. And
yeah, no, I think so. For that, there's a ton of iconic shots in this episode, though. Of course, the shot with Two-Face turning and the lightning striking for the final scene and reveal is absolutely iconic. There's a scene in part 2 where Batman's riding on a motorcycle through the rain, and the lightning is used a couple different times in the first part to great plot advancement. It's great in the scene with Big Bad Harv in the psychiatrist's office. It's fantastic. So for that reason, a little inconsistent in episode 2. Would have been a little bit higher if it was more consistent. I think the second half of part 2 got a lot better. But for that reason, I gave it 7 out of 10. What about you?
Same. I also went 7 out of 10. There, like you said, there are some really great shots. The shot at the end, which we mentioned talking about music, of Batman and Commissioner Gordon are sort of talking and sort of wrapping up the episode, and Batman takes a coin and flips it, and it lands in a fountain, and you see the coin go in. You see Batman's reflection, then you see the coin hit the water. There's beautiful the ripples go through the water. His face becomes distorted, and then the water settles, and you see his face again, and then they sort of end on a close up of the coin sinking to the bottom of the fountain. Like, there's some really strong stuff in here. Like you said, the inconsistency maybe keeps it from being a perfect score.
Yeah. But
this is certainly still a very strong episode.
Absolutely.
There's a shot right at the beginning of the episode of part 1 when the drug bust happens, and the press is asking Dent if this was all his idea, and Commissioner Gordon looks up to the top of the building, and you see the moon, and you see Batman. This is really the only #Cape movement I get to talk about in this episode.
Liam's Cape Movement Corner.
Yeah, it's back for just a brief appearance here, but where Dent is thanking Commissioner Gordon, and Commissioner Gordon looks up and sees Batman, and he's completely in shadow. You see his cape flowing, and the moon's behind him, and then he sort of goes off into the night.
They actually used that on the promo for the Fox episodes at that time.
It's one of those shots that I'd seen in GIF form over the years online and stuff, but I couldn't have placed the episode.
Pretty iconic, yeah.
Yeah, so,
I would have guessed it was a Catwoman episode, to be honest. So
yeah.
It's funny that it showed up there. One of the shots that I was going to talk about also was in that same scene, there was a shot where there's a missile that goes off and it explodes, and then you see the police department in the dark at that time, and they light up, and there's like a red sheen that comes across them. I thought that was super cool in that scene there.
And that's just another little bit we've talked about it several episodes before, and we'll keep talking about it. That's what separated this cartoon from the other superhero, really all cartoons, but especially the other superhero cartoons of that day, where that extra mile that made the show just a little bit better and added a little more flavor.
There was also two little Max Fleischer nods, also with a painted background, with an animation added to it.
Two-Face is reading a file, and it's literally just his eyeballs are the only thing animated.
So good.
Everything else is just the painted on the background.
And the other one was the bandage, when they were taking the bandages off of him at the end of episode 1. The bandages are animated, but Two-Face's face itself is painted. Cool little nods to that. We love those old cartoons and nods to those, so that always gets a thumbs up from us.
Thorne's girl, Candace, has also felt like a very Max Fleischer. She's a very 1930s.
Yep.
woman looking design. Not much of a nose in her design. And
long eyelashes, dark hair, bright red lipstick. Absolutely. Yep. That was a very 1930s woman design. All right, Liam, let's move on from there, and our final category is going to be voice acting, which I would say was probably the strongest part of this episode. What did you think about it?
Yeah, it's like we've mentioned in passing already. Not a ton of Batman. The idea that we've talked about, there's dialogue heavy episodes that Kevin Conroy really has to bring his A game in. This one, Kevin Conroy's he's a background player. Batman himself is a very background player, as we mentioned. So Richard Mall as Harvey Dent / Two-Face really carries this whole story. It's a story about him.
Yep.
So he has to cover it, and just the little things. Obviously, the obvious things are the difference of the Harvey voice, the big bad Harv voice, which is sort of a combination, and then when the accident happens, the official, the Two-Face voice that everybody knows.
Right.
There's little differences in between, and sort of the way I had always sort of imagined in my head that once he becomes Two-Face, it's just the Two-Face voice that we hear. Mm-hmm. But when you watch it back, there's certain scenes. There's when Batman first confronts him, where he brings up Grace, and he sort of turns away, and he sort of looks a little embarrassed, and he starts talking about Grace, and what do you know about her? What do you know about and he drops back into the regular Harvey Dent voice, and it's a really nice little touch.
Absolutely.
And the same when he meets with Grace before Thorne and his thugs break in, and he's talking about this is who I am now, and this when he gives the monologue about Chance and everything that we've talked about already, is he's sort of dropping in and out of the more traditional Two-Face voice, and then until the end when he's about to shoot Thorne, and Batman begs him not to, asks him to let the law take over, which is when he said, this is the only law that matters is the law of averages. Mm-hmm. And that's a line that if you give that to a lot of voice actors, that could be pretty hokey.
Yeah.
That could be, as we talked about with Two-Face in general, that can be a pretty gimmicky thing.
Sure, absolutely.
So to be able to kind of come through with that, the sorrow, the tragedy, and be able to give some pretty over-the-top lines and still maintain that sense of realism, that sense of not losing this character in the cartoon, so to speak, not becoming a one-dimensional or a parody is probably a good word for it. So yeah, I went ahead and gave voice acting 7 out of 10. I really liked Harvey. I really liked Rupert Thorne. Was a very good job.
John Vernon
as Rupert Thorne did a very good job as well. I like Diane Michelle as Candace, who she's done a million voice acting roles over the years, lots of video games and cartoons, so she's a pro, obviously. Ones that kind of detracted for me, Murphy Cross as Grace. I did not think she was very good.
Okay.
I think she wasn't awful or anything.
Yeah, I don't think they asked. They didn't ask too much from her. She was a supporting character. She was
That's
a main
fair.
plot device, I think. No. I think that it's fair to say that she was not. She was forgettable. She was a plot device. I think that they didn't ask too much from her, but I could definitely see where that's. Maybe somebody else would have made more of an impact.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily have a voice actress in mind, but yeah, there's something, if that character is given to like a really great actress, and maybe this, maybe it's a 10. I went 7 out of 10 for voice acting. Like I said, the strengths are really strong, but I thought Grace lets it down a little bit, and I thought some of the thug voices were a little...
Oh, they're a little over the top.
The twin thugs that Two-Face hires.
Thorne's one guy.
Boss? It's pretty generic.
Eats guys like you for breakfast in the first episode.
Yeah, they're a little generic. Some of the press voices and stuff like that. And like I said, Grace. So I went 7 out of 10. Like I said, the strengths are Bruce and Bruce Wayne and Batman. Obviously, always Kevin Conroy's always going to be good. There is the great scene you mentioned with him and Alfred, where it very much reflects what we talked about in the Phantasm review.
Absolutely.
Which is this idea that Batman saved who knows how many lives, how many people he saved from muggers, or how many bombs he's defused that the Joker set up, but his best friend is the one he failed.
Well, he's still haunted by the fact that he was a 7-year-old or 6-year-old, and he has this nightmare at the beginning of the second episode, and it starts out as, you know, Harvey asking why couldn't Batman save him, or why couldn't Bruce save him, and then it morphs into his parents, and then you're like, holy moly, he was a 7-year-old kid who feels guilt for not being able to save his parents, some responsibility for his parents' death, which is just, man, like, Batman himself may have a bit of a mental disorder.
Maybe
like,
he should have gone and seen a shrink.
Right? Yeah, for serious. Like the idea that a 7-year-old has any responsibility for protecting, you know, his parents is certainly ridiculous. But I think that certainly plays into the Batman character and is an interesting dynamic compared to what we talked about with the Phantasm episode.
I think we see it in future episodes. We see it in Robin's Reckoning. We talked about. He's so afraid, you know, that Robin might go down a path, you know, perhaps similar to Two-Face.
Absolutely.
You know, his trepidation of letting Barbara Gordon be Batgirl.
Yep.
Going all the way forward to Batman Beyond, where he's very, you know, the idea of giving this teenager, this street kid, the bat suit and giving him free reign to go, you know, avenge Terry, you know, Terry to go avenge his father's death. In Rebirth is. You know, that all can kind of be traced back to that idea of he's, you know, as many lives as he saved, some of Batman's greatest failures are the people that mattered the most to him.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So you gave it 7 out of 10, right?
Yes.
All right. I went ahead, actually, based on all those things you said, I based on the fact that Richard Mall had to carry this episode, and not only do it just with one voice, but playing two separate characters as the same character, and doing it so incredibly well. I gave it a perfect score here. I gave 10 out of 10,
right.
10 for this one. For all those reasons that you stated, he's just phenomenal in this episode. They give him so much room to explore the psychology of the character. It doesn't come off as hokey. He's such a likable character as Harvey Dent, which he's a little goofy. And it's funny because they don't spend much time on him as you know, Harvey the politician, but even his interactions at the campaigns and the night of his election and such are just great. Like, he's just a likable guy, and to see the tragedy of him, you know, transforming into this monster and being able to communicate that through two different styles of voices, a softer voice, something a little more gravelly and harsh, and it's just really, really good. It's believable. It's an iconic voice to me because, you know, when you think Two-Face, you know, you talked about that maybe as the Joker, or you know, when you see or you read comic books as Batman, you hear Kevin Conroy's voice. I think it's the same way when I read a Two-Face comic. You hear it. It's just something that sticks with the character, and it's something that was even almost adapted in the Nolan films. I think he went with a more gravelly voice when he changes over into Two-Face after the accident that happened. So it's, to me, great job. Just an iconic performance, and being able to carry not one but 2 episodes. And you're not Batman. Yeah. Like, that's that alone to me is proof that, you know, for me, gives this a perfect score. So,
and yeah, there's just little minor things we mentioned. We mentioned the Alfred scene. Commissioner Gordon probably has 4 or 5 lines in this episode. Really good, but all very. You know, as you mentioned, he's sort of taking Harvey aside at the beginning of part 1 and trying to sort of shield him from some bad press, and absolutely, and at the end, sort of he asks Batman if there's any hope for Harvey. And it's a very sorrowful ending, but there is the hope, which is where Batman gives one of the great lines, I think, in the history of this universe, where he says, "Where there's love, there's hope," and then he flips the coin and notes, "But a little luck wouldn't hurt either," right? And flips the coin into the pond, and I guess wishes his friend, you know, good luck.
Which adds such a great dynamic to the Batman character, because you think of Batman as this dark, brooding character that doesn't have, like, Superman is the hope. Right. Superman is the character that has hope, that is you know, he's the sun, Batman is the darkness. Yeah. Like, so for this episode to give a little bit of layer to Batman of, okay, he's not just this pessimistic, beaten down guy that has no hope. He has a little bit of hope, and he finds that in other people, whether it's Dick, or as we see in Robin's Reckoning, or in Alfred, or in this case in Harvey, is really cool.
Yeah,
certainly very cool. All right, Liam. So I guess that brings our final scores to, what did you end up giving it as a final score?
Final score for me was 27 out of 40. I think it's very good. Like I said, there's just sort of some minor things. Like we said, sometimes the score doesn't always directly reflect how much you enjoy an episode. This is an all-time classic.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's going to dispute that.
I see it on the top 10s in most people's rankings.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. So, I mean, definitely. I mean, if you want to simplify it down to a recommend or not recommend, absolutely recommend this for anybody. If you want an introduction to that character, if you're not that familiar with the Two-Face character, and if you know him from the Tommy Lee Jones portrayal, or
even the Aaron Eckhart in
I mean, he's kind of he's so swallowed up in that incredible Heath Ledger Joker performance that he is somewhat of an afterthought in there. But yeah, definitely recommend. But yeah, as a total, my score is 27 out of 40. Very good. Really, it's definitely worth a watch. If there's any doubt in your mind, yeah, you should go watch this.
Absolutely. My final score was 30 out of 40. Wholeheartedly agree. Go watch this episode. Stream it on Amazon. Go watch the DVDs again, or find it however you find things to stream. It's an excellent episode, and definitely worth your time and energy. All right, Liam, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap things up for today. Don't forget to check us out on Twitter at DCAU Review. Give us any feedback, any thoughts, anything that we missed from this episode, anything that you liked or disliked that we didn't, anything that you would give a higher or lower score. Tweet at us. Let us know. We'd love to interact with you. Also, go ahead and like us on Facebook. Search for DCAU Review. Please subscribe to us on iTunes and give us a 5-star review. That helps our podcast out immensely. Also, you can check us out at DCAUreview.com, where you can stream episodes weekly, and including any and all past episodes. All right, for Liam, I am Callum. We will talk to you guys on the next episode.
Bye-bye.